And right before I heard this voice say, "I've got you." And I was like, I looked around and I was like, who said that? There was nobody in the room. Nobody.
I'll be honest with you. For years, I thought I knew the Jimmy Fortune story, the tenor of the Statler Brothers, the young man from the Virginia mountains who walked into the group in 1982 and wrote Elizabeth, a lucky break, a fairy tale. I was wrong, because the real story doesn't start with luck. It starts with a phone call nobody wanted to make, about a man who was too sick to stand on stage and who handpicked the stranger who would take his place. Jimmy Fortune is 71 years old now. He's still on the road, still hitting those high notes. And when he talks about how he became a Statler brother, he doesn't talk about himself. He talks about the man who got sick, the man who hired him, and the morning he woke up on an operating table wondering if his own time was up. This is the story of the day that changed the Statler brothers forever, and the man who's been carrying that weight with gratitude for 44 years. And near the end, I'll tell you what Jimmy said about the last phone calls he ever had with Harold Reid, and the one thing he couldn't do at Harold's funeral. Stay with me. Lester James Fortune was born March 11, 1955 in Williamsburg, Virginia, and raised in Nelson County deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains. One of 9 children. Not a lot of money, but a lot of music. Church music, mountain music, the kind of singing you do because it's what your family does on a Sunday. Nelson County is the kind of place where everybody knows your people. It's Walton's mountain country, the real hills that inspired the television show. And in those hills, a boy who could sing was a boy who got asked to sing at church, at funerals, at the VFW on a Saturday night. Jimmy learned early that a voice wasn't a gift you kept for yourself. It was something you gave away, one room at a time. He had a voice that didn't sound like anyone else's, a high, clear tenor that could sit on top of a harmony like sunlight on a ridgeline. But in the late 1970s, a voice like that didn't get you anywhere by itself. It got you bar gigs. It got you weekend work at a ski resort in Virginia, singing for people who were mostly there for the hot chocolate. And that's exactly where he was, singing at a ski resort. No record deal, no manager. No idea that about 90 miles away in Staunton, Virginia, the most successful vocal group in country music was about to lose one of its founding members. To understand what Jimmy walked into, you have to understand what the Statler brothers were. 4 men from Staunton, Virginia. Harold Reid on bass, the big voice, the big personality, the one who did the talking. His younger brother, Don Reid, singing lead. Phil Balsley on baritone, the quiet one, the glue. And Lew DeWitt, the original tenor and the man who wrote Flowers on the Wall, the song that won them a Grammy in 1965 and put them on the map. They weren't brothers, and none of them was named Statler. They took the name off a box of tissues in a hotel room. Harold always said they could just as easily have been the Kleenex brothers. Their sound was rooted in the church, shaped by the great gospel quartets like the Blackwood Brothers and the Statesmen, whose 4-part harmonies had been the template for that warm, stacked vocal style long before country radio caught on. They'd spent years as Johnny Cash's opening act and backup singers, touring alongside Johnny and June Carter Cash, with many of those shows filmed at the Ryman Auditorium in Nashville. They were regulars on the Grand Ole Opry circuit, and that connection to Nashville's most storied institution gave them a credibility that went deeper than chart positions. Their recording of The Class of '57 earned them a second Grammy in 1972. By the late 1970s, they had their own string of hits on Mercury Records, and an audience that felt less like fans and more like family. Lew DeWitt wasn't just their tenor. He was their co-founder. His voice was the top of the stack. You take that away and the whole building wobbles. And by 1981, the building was wobbling because Lew was sick, and it was getting worse every week. Lew DeWitt had Crohn's disease. If you've known anyone who's lived with it, you know it's relentless. It attacks the digestive system. It steals your weight, your energy, your ability to simply get through a day. And it doesn't care that you've got a tour bus leaving at 6 in the morning. And here's what made it so cruel for a singer. Crohn's doesn't just hurt, it drains you. The breath support a tenor needs to float those high notes. That comes from the body. When the body is fighting itself, the voice is the first thing to go. Lew was trying to hit the notes that had defined the Statler sound for 2 decades, and his own body was taking them away from him, night by night. By 1981, Lew couldn't do it anymore. The travel, the shows, the long nights. His body was done. The Statlers were facing the thing every great group dreads. Do you cancel? Do you stop? Or do you try to find someone who can stand in a founding member's spot and not get booed off the stage? And here's the part of the story that gets me every time. Lew DeWitt himself went looking for his own replacement. He'd heard a young man singing at a ski resort, a kid with a tenor that reminded him, maybe, of what he used to be able to do. Lew recommended Jimmy Fortune to the group. Not a manager, not a record label. The man who was losing his place in the band picked the man who would take it. Think about what that takes. Lew could have made the group wait. He could have made them beg. He could have let the whole thing fall apart out of pride. Instead, he walked into a room and said, in effect, "There's a kid who can do this. Call him." Jimmy got a call. He auditioned in Nashville. And on January 28, 1982, in Savannah, Georgia, Jimmy Fortune walked onto a stage with the Statler Brothers for the very first time. He was 26 years old, and he was only supposed to be temporary. The plan was simple. Jimmy fills in, Lew gets better. Lew comes back. Lew never came back, the Crohns didn't let go, and in August of 1982, the Statler Brothers made it official. Jimmy Fortune was the permanent tenor. Lew DeWitt, the man who'd co-founded the group, who'd written their first Grammy winner, who'd personally chosen his successor, was out. Think about what that does to a young man. You're grateful, you're terrified, and you're standing in the shoes of someone the audience loves, someone who's sick, someone who gave you this. Every night you're being compared to a ghost who's still alive. Jimmy has told the story of those early days with a laugh, but you can hear the nerves underneath it. Once, arriving at a venue, he went back to the bus for his guitar while the other 3 went ahead to sound check. When he tried to get in, a security guard stopped him cold because nobody recognized him. The new Statler brother couldn't get into his own show. He said he didn't argue. He just waited until somebody came and got him. That was the job for a while, being the one nobody recognized yet. Jimmy has said many times over the years that he never once felt like he replaced Lew. He felt like he was holding Lew's spot. That distinction mattered to him. It still does. And then something happened that nobody expected. Least of all, Jimmy. He started writing. The story goes that Jimmy was watching the movie Giant on television one night, Elizabeth Taylor on the screen, and a melody just came. A tender, aching thing with one name in the chorus. He'd never written a song before, not one. He brought it to the brothers almost apologetically. The new guy, the fill-in, asking if they'd maybe take a listen to something he'd scribbled down. Elizabeth was the first song Jimmy Fortune ever wrote. Released in November 1983 on the album Today, produced by Nashville veteran Jerry Kennedy, whose production credits in the 80s read like a who's who of country music. It went to #1 on the country chart. The Statler Brothers' second ever #1, after nearly 20 years and more than 40 charting singles. The new kid, the temporary replacement, had just given the group the biggest song of their career. He wasn't done. My Only Love, from the 1984 album Atlanta Blue, went to #1. Too Much on My Heart, from Partners in Rhyme, went to #1 in 1985. Forever, from 4 for the Show, hit the top 10 in 1986, 3 #1s and a top 10, all written by the man who'd been singing for Ski Lodge Tips 5 years earlier. And then, in 1989, he co-wrote a song that meant something different. More than a name on a wall. It's about a mother standing at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, running her fingers over her son's name. The Statlers had always sung about the class of '57, about small towns and lost time, but this one landed in a way that made grown men in the audience stop breathing. If you were there, you remember. It went top 10, and it's still the song people ask Jimmy to sing at every show. Years later, Jimmy got to sing Elizabeth to Elizabeth Taylor herself at a birthday celebration. A mountain boy from Nelson County, singing his first song to the woman who inspired it. By the early 1990s, the Statler Brothers were something bigger than a band. They were a Saturday night institution. Their annual 4th of July concert in Staunton, Happy Birthday USA, drew tens of thousands to a town of 20-something thousand. People planned vacations around it. In 1991, the Nashville network gave them a television show. The Statler Brothers show debuted as the highest-rated program the network had ever aired, and it ran for 7 seasons. It was variety television the way it used to be. Music, comedy, guests, and the 4 of them trading jokes like men who'd been on a bus together for 30 years. Because they had. Harold did the comedy. Harold did most of the talking. And Jimmy, the one who'd needed a security guard's permission to get into his own show a decade earlier, was now in living rooms across America every week, singing the high part with his eyes closed. And here's a small thing that connects the Statlers to a world most of their fans never expected. Flowers on the Wall, Lew DeWitt's song, the one that started it all, turned up in Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction in 1994. A country harmony group from Staunton, Virginia, suddenly playing in art houses and college dorms. Jimmy has always sung that song with Lew in mind. Most of the Pulp Fiction crowd had no idea what they were hearing. But that's what a great song does. It finds its way into rooms you never imagined. Lew DeWitt never saw the show. He died on August 15, 1990. He was 52. The disease that took him off the road in 1981 never stopped. Jimmy Fortune had, by then, been singing Lew's part for 8 years. He's spoken about Lew with nothing but reverence, the man who opened the door and then quietly stepped out of the way. On October 26, 2002, in Salem, Virginia, the Statler Brothers played their final concert, 47 years after Harold first sang in a church in Staunton, 21 years after a kid from a ski resort walked on stage in Savannah. Harold, Don, and Phil retired. They'd earned it. Jimmy, who was only 47, wasn't ready to stop. He said the hardest part wasn't the last show. It was the Monday after, when there was no bus to get on, so he kept singing. Solo records, gospel records, a touring schedule that would exhaust a man half his age. And in 2007 and 2008, the Statler Brothers, all of them, including Jimmy and the memory of Lew, were inducted into the Gospel Music Hall of Fame and the Country Music Hall of Fame back to back. Jimmy stood on that stage as a full member. Not a replacement, not a fill-in. A Statler Brother. Here's where the story turns, and I want to handle it carefully because these are real people and real grief. April 24, 2020. Harold Reid died of kidney failure in his hometown of Staunton, Virginia, at the very start of the pandemic. He was 80 years old. Payoff. In an interview a couple of years later, Jimmy said that Harold had kidney disease and needed a transplant, that they knew he was sick, but Jimmy didn't realize how bad it had gotten. He said plainly that if it weren't for Harold Reid, nobody would know who Jimmy Fortune is, that Harold hired him, taught him the music business and so much else, and was like an older brother in every way that mattered. And that after the group retired, he and Harold would talk on the phone, solving the world's problems, Jimmy called it. Right up until a couple of weeks before Harold died. Picture that for a second. 2 old bandmates, 18 years after the last show, still calling each other to argue about the news and laugh about the road. That's not a professional relationship. That's family. Because of COVID at the service, Jimmy couldn't even hug Don Reid, who had immune problems of his own. Everyone was spread out, masked, 6 feet apart. Jimmy said all he could do was wave. The man who gave him everything was being laid to rest, and he could only wave. In February 2023, Jimmy Fortune went in for a routine test on his heart. He was 67. He felt fine. The doctors found what his team described as concerning areas. Within days, the decision was made. On February 15, he underwent quintuple bypass surgery, 5 blockages. For a man who'd sung "Go Rest High on That Mountain" to thousands of weeping audiences, this was as close as it gets. His team posted the news, and the prayers came in from everywhere. The Oak Ridge Boys, who've walked the same gospel country road for decades and know exactly what it means to keep a harmony group alive across generations, shared it. The fan pages shared it. People who'd seen him in 1984 shared it. The surgery was a success. His wife Nina and his daughters were at his side in recovery. His team told fans he'd be back in about 12 weeks, and he was. At 68, he went right back on the road. He's 71 now. He tours solo with his band and with the gospel quartet Brothers of the Heart, a project that has become something genuinely special in its own right. Brothers of the Heart lets Jimmy do what the Statlers always did best: stack harmonies, lean into the gospel roots, and make a room feel like a congregation. It's not a nostalgia act. It's where he puts his energy now, and the audiences that have found him through that group are finding the whole Statler story for the first time. Worth seeking out if you haven't heard them. In March of this year, a Statler Brothers mural was dedicated in Philadelphia, Mississippi, and fans were still lining up to see him play that same night. And every show, somewhere in the set, he sings Elizabeth, the first song he ever wrote. The one he brought to the brothers almost apologetically 43 years ago. So what was the day that changed the Statler Brothers forever? It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a scandal. It was a sick man in 1981 deciding that the music mattered more than his pride and sending a kid from a ski resort to carry it. Lew DeWitt gave Jimmy Fortune a chance. Harold Reid gave him a home. Don and Phil gave him a harmony to stand inside, and Jimmy has spent 44 years making sure none of them is forgotten. Every time he hits that high note, and every time he tells this story the way it really happened. There's a line people use about singers like Jimmy. They say he's the last one still out there, but I don't think that's quite right. When he sings Flowers on the Wall, Lew is on that stage. When he tells a joke between songs, that's Harold's timing. He's not the last one. He's the one still carrying the other 3. If you grew up with the Statler Brothers, tell me in the comments which song brings it all back. And if you were ever at one of those 4th of July shows in Staunton, I want to hear about it. And if you want more stories about the legends who gave us the music we still carry, subscribe. We're here every week. Thank you for watching. And Jimmy, if you're out there, rest easy. You held the spot.